I know in your book you mentioned Steve Jobs, and I think the line he famously said was the most powerful person in the world is the storyteller.
Right.
And the best businesses, like many of the Fortune 500 companies you work with, Matthew, understand that stories stick in our brain in a way that a PowerPoint presentation simply don't. And you mentioned kind of how quickly and intimately people connect to someone who is simply telling them a story, as you just mentioned there a moment ago. And it seems, that a good story engages multiple parts of the brain all at the same time, and you build up this affinity with the person. But in your experience, why is it that stories resonate so profoundly, where other forms of communication just don't? And I know storytelling is such an ancient skill, going back thousands of years when things weren't written down and they were passed by stories. But why do you think stories have such a power even today still?
Well, I'll say first, we still have those ancient brains. Human beings have existed on the planet for about 200,000 years, but we've only been able to write things down for 5,000 years. So the way we passed information from generation to generation was through song and story. And that is why song and story means so much to us. Our brains are wired so that if I start telling you a story, chemicals immediately get released in your brain that signal to you, pay attention, this might keep you alive. Today it doesn't keep us alive, but those ancient brains are still stuck in our skulls and they still respond in the same way. But I also think that when we speak in story, what we offer an audience is sort of a movie in the mind. We give them images and dialogue and emotion and thought. So that if you're just speaking in sentences, if you're just offering ideas, but that is detached from the images and the emotion of a story, it's easily forgettable. My wife and I were at an educational conference a couple of years ago. My wife's a teacher too, and she's sort of invested in storytelling. So this is something we really care about. Someone speaking is great, and someone speaking on a topic we care about is great. And there were 5 speakers that day, and the first speaker took the stage. He had a metal lunchbox from the 1980s. He put it on a stool, and he described how he was an immigrant growing up. His family had just moved to America, and they were as poor as you could be for a very long time. He was hungry as a kid. But every September, he made sure, or his parents made sure, that they went to the store and bought him a new lunchbox. Because in the 1980s, the right lunchbox was social capital. And they understood it. If I send my son to school with the right lunchbox, he will fit in a way he will fail to do so without. And it was a beautiful story. I cried during the story. And the message was, people are willing to do almost anything for their kids, so teachers have to do the same. And I'll remember that forever. The last speaker was the keynote, and he spoke for about 20 minutes on equity and diversity. And when we finished, my wife, a teacher and a person invested in storytelling, I said, "What'd you think?" And she said, "I'm never going to forget that first guy." And I said, "I won't either," because he told a story and he touched us. And I said, "What about the last guy?" And she said, "Oh, he was great." And I said, "What did he say?" 5 minutes after he was done speaking. I said, "What did he say?" And she said, "Well, he talked about equity and diversity." I said, "I know, but what did he really say? Can you say anything about what you just learned from him?" And she said, "It's funny, I can't really remember specifically what he talked about." And it was because he didn't tell a story. He spoke eloquently. His sentences sounded lovely. He moved about the stage the way a professional does. It sounded all great, but it was utterly meaningless in the end. It was like cotton candy. It disappeared because there was no image, emotion, thought, action, dialogue. None of that existed, so it was nothing for my brain to hold on to. And that's the way most people speak. They speak in ways that they almost aggressively want to be forgotten by failing to actually share something about themselves, create an image, cinema of the mind. They fail to do all those things, and that's why oftentimes we go to conferences, speeches, professional development, and by the time we're in our car, it's all sort of lost to us because no one's given us a means to retain the content.